You want me to do the introductions, then you can edit all this out then?
Yeah, you want to do our profanity warning?
Yeah. We know that Jim and I use foul language from time to time, more so Jim than me, because he's like a devil and I'm like an angel. We have Shawna with us. We're not really sure, she has a potty mouth or if she has a clean mouth. So be careful, and if you don't like it, well, hit the stop button.
Right. It depends on the topic, I suppose.
Absolutely. I'm Jim from Knights of the Braille. With me is the wonderful, wonderful Richard.
See, he's already lying. But and with us today is the so far seemingly intelligent Shawna.
Yeah, we have Shawna Spain, an accessibility advocate. She has autism and an autoimmune disorder, which has made her an ambulatory wheelchair user. And she works with a service dog, which already makes you amazing because dogs are fantastic.
Yes, dogs are fantastic.
What is the name of your dog, Shawna?
I'm actually working with two right now. So my oldest, who's fully trained, her full name is Interabang. We call her Tara for short. As I mentioned, I'm a writer, so I like punctuation jokes. And then the youngest, she's only about a year, and we got her like 2 weeks before everything shut down for COVID. So she's like half trained, like she's trained in the house, but still needs her, exposure training. Her name is Ellipsis, and we call her Ipsy for short.
And both of them function as service dogs for you?
Yeah. So Tara was originally trained as an autism service dog because my condition didn't degenerate for another 4 years to the point where I needed a chair. And I'd never heard of it before. I mean, most people are familiar with guide dogs. And in fact, the first time I saw a service dog that wasn't a guide dog was on a train in Chicago, and a woman was having a seizure. And so in my mind at that point, seizure dogs, guide dogs, those were the service dogs. And so when a breeder approached me and was like, you can have one for autism, and I started looking into it, I was like, heck, this could be really useful. Turns out it is. I mean, it's not a walk in the park. I mean, dogs are not robots, so you have to deal with bodily functions and their opinions because they do have them.
And you have to keep them focused too. But before I go on with the million questions I have, Shawna, Richard, have you had much exposure to people with autism?
I have not. I do know one person that has autism, and it is severe, and I do believe Asperger's is a form of autism, right?
Yes. So originally in the DSM-4, Asperger's and autism were separated. The DSM is, I forget what the letters stand for, but in the US, at least, it's a diagnostic book. It's stupid, really, but the psychiatrists use it. Now, the DSM-5 came out, five or 6 years ago. I can't remember exactly, but they rolled Asperger's and a bunch of other stuff like pervasive sensory disorder and things like that into autism, the autism diagnosis. So we're kind of all lumped together. Now, a lot of people use functioning labels like high functioning or low functioning or severe or mild. And we try not to do that. The autistic community tries not to do that because what that implies is a sort of bias, right? So if somebody were to call me high functioning, because I'm sitting here and I'm talking to y'all and I sound kind of normal, I think. It depends on the day.
Compared to us, you sound very normal, Sean.
Right?
Don't worry.
But,
I was just saying, she sounds a heck of a lot more normal than you and I do.
but it depends on the day, right? Like there are days where I cannot speak. It's very difficult and it comes out really garbled and slurred.
Yeah.
And, there are days where I can't handle sensory stuff at all. Like last night I got kind of off balance and I couldn't eat the dinner that we had made because it was too weird in my mouth, and I couldn't, like the TV ends up being something that's on volume 2. And my poor neurotypical husband is like, can we raise the volume? I'm like, I can't, that's so loud right now. And it's just at 2, So it depends on the situation you're in. Like, basically if I'm ever in an airport, I'm super low functioning if we're going to use those labels. But if I'm, giving a presentation at work, I'm high functioning. And that's because I can control my environment enough to make sure that I'm in a place where I can be as high functioning as I can be in that moment. And it's just, it really is a spectrum. I like to call it, I like to refer to it as flavors of autism, right? Like, which flavor are you? And because there are so many different things that make it up, and I also like to say, if you've met one autistic, you've met one autistic. Like, we're all so different. I've never met another autistic that's just like me.
Yeah, we have the same issue in the blind community where
Oh, right.
we're pretty broad on the spectrum, and we don't have any sort of noun to categorize each one, so it's sort of a case by case basis. But to my understanding, Asperger's was sort of a catch-all term like irritable bowel syndrome, where they don't really have a specific diagnosis. They just say you have this condition and there's multiple different facets to it. Is that correct?
No, there was actually a very specific diagnostic criteria. One of them was like hyperlexia. So I started talking and reading when I was really young. I can't remember the others, but things like that, as opposed to an autism diagnosis at the time where you look for delayed speech. Now, I am not a psychiatrist, so this is just all me reading books and being interested in this topic because I'm a dork. So do not take any of this at like, well, I heard Shawna say that if you don't speak until you're 3, then you're autistic. Like, don't do that. Go talk to a doctor. But a really interesting book I read was by Steve Silberman. It's called Neruo Tribes, and I really enjoyed it because all of his references you can actually go follow up on, which I super did because I have been burned before. But so Asperger was a scientist in Germany, I think. And he was looking into this. He was researching this disability at the same time that a guy named Connor was, also German, I think, but he had been evacuated out to the U.S. Connor was specifically looking for the kids that are delayed speech or never speak, very pronounced stims, so like rocking or self-harm, things like that. And Asperger was looking for a different kind. So both kinds tend to have a lot of similarities, like sensory sensitivities and social weird, which is what I call it. But on Asperger's side, he was finding people that were hyper intelligent, and and that's where you see like the hyper focus on like one or two specific topics, and that's like all that person can really focus on. And so he was.
Yeah.
He was.
You're describing my friend like to a T.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, that was part of my diagnosis as well, as I get rather obsessive about certain things. And Asperger's theory was if you put that person in an environment where that is a benefit, then you're going to see them succeed. If you put them in an environment where that's not a benefit, then you're going to see them fail. Right. So, for example, I'm obsessed with accessibility technology. I'm in a place where I can use that. Obsession is a tough word to use, by the way, but I can use that passion, that drive, in a very successful way right now. But if I were in a different career or different circumstances where I couldn't have the time or the luxury to spend researching that and using that kind of thing, then I would be failing right now, because it would be all I could concentrate on, all I could really have a drive for. So it's kind of interesting when you look into that kind of thing. The way that Neruo Tribes, by the way, is a sad book. There are bits in it that are super sad. So if anybody's like, "Oh, I'm going to go read a positive book about autism," it is positive. it is positive in that it is accurate and it gives a very clear picture of autism through the ages, but it is not happy. Per se.
Go ahead.
To my list, but it's good that you're breaking it down for us, that we think of autism as a collective, same way that blind people think of blind people as a collective, and
yes,
we should be approaching people as individuals. I've got a bunch of people in my local blind community with different flavors of autism. One of them, he has to ask a question about everything, so whenever you come to him with a topic, you have to already have all your information ready. And if he doesn't like the answer, you can get locked into what I call a loop, where you go in between a couple of questions. And then there's another gentleman who, as you say, is pretty non-verbal and can't communicate, but he wants to be around people. So you have to just take people as they are. So thanks for sharing that. I mean, do you find that when you're getting to a point where you feel like you're going to be a spot of being nonverbal. Are there triggers for that, or is it just a random series of events? How does that occur for you?
So for me, and this is my experience, I want to be clear. For me, it tends to be a buildup of things that I've been socialized to disregard as a problem. So like, I like things in my house to be in like a very specific place, on like my office, you know. And if somebody moves something or doesn't put something back in the same way, that's like sorry, are you familiar with the spoon theory?
No, go ahead, teach us.
Okay, so again, do not quote me on any of this. There's a very nice lady.
We're going to hold you down to it now.
Nope.
Yep.
If you want the full history, you should Google spoon theory. But there was a woman with lupus, and she was trying to explain to her friend why she couldn't come out to dinner that night. And you know, she in the article I read, she was saying it's really frustrating, you know, because she's constantly saying no, and then she starts getting left out, and it's, you know, some days she can and most days she can't. So she was explaining, like, she's trying to explain this. They're in a cafe, and she told her friend to go get all the spoons from all the tables. And so her friend came back with like 8 spoons and immediately asked for more. Like, should I go find some more? And the woman with lupus was like, no, actually, this is perfect. You wake up with 8 spoons. Now tell me about your day. Like, what do you do when you get, you know, you wake up? Now what do you do? And her friend was like, oh, I get out of bed, I take a shower, I eat breakfast, I go to work. And the woman with lupus was like, okay, so getting out of bed cost me a spoon, and here's why. And she explains why with lupus, like when you sit up out of bed, your heart rate does weird things, and like you get dizzy, and like your breathing has to stabilize. So you have to like sit up and then like wait a minute. And all of that takes a certain amount of energy. Taking a shower, like, you know, I have to sit regularly when I'm in the shower. I can't take a shower that's, you know, 5 minutes long and get all the bits. Mine are more like 30 minutes long because I have to take breaks while I'm taking a shower. You know, so if, you know, there's somebody who can spend 5 minutes taking a shower, that takes less energy than my 30-minute shower, you know, with me taking breaks. Right. So that's spoon theory. The idea is you wake up in the morning with a certain amount of spoons. You get through your day, and you lose spoons as you get through your day. And in the spoon theory story, the woman with lupus got to the end of a day, you know, and she said, okay, you've got 1 spoon left. You can either make dinner, which will cost a spoon and mean you won't have enough energy to clean up, which means you have to think about that for your spoon count the next day, right? If you use a dish that must be cleaned for you to use, you know, to cook again, just keep that in mind. And or you could go out for dinner. You could like order out and go do pickup, but you'd only have a spoon to get there, so you'd be using energy you would have to get home. You know, or you could skip dinner, use that spoon to do something else, like maybe some dishes from yesterday. But that's going to affect your spoon count the next day. And for those of us with autoimmune disorders, or actually, I don't want to keep it to just autoimmune disorders because the spoon theory is really spread, but pretty much anybody with a disability, some days you wake up and it's different. You could have done all the right things the day before. You could have gotten a great night's sleep, and you wake up and something you have no control over means you've got 2 spoons instead of 10. And so I use the spoon theory quite a bit. And it's actually why my screen name is the way it is. The name I use online is like 7 Spoon. And it's yeah, so it's a joke.
I thought I recognized your voice. You was in a one-shot that I played in.
Oh yeah, okay, yeah.
I thought I recognized your voice, but I love the spoon theory explanation. That makes absolutely perfect sense.
It works really well. There's also a way to do it where you use spell slots. So if you play D&D at all, you know that.
What's that game? I have no idea.
No idea. Yeah. So if you're a D&D fan, a Dungeons and Dragons fan, you're playing with a magic character. You get different levels of spells. So like. Level 1 is like a pretty easy spell, and you tend to have more level 1 spell slots as opposed to a level 7 spell slot. So the way I like to explain this is, let's say I'm going into a coffee shop that I'm super familiar with. I know I can order online, and all I have to do is duck in, grab my coffee, and leave. All of the people there know me well enough to know not to yell my name or say hi or anything. Like the most they can do is like a little wave, and if I don't wave back, nobody gets offended. All of the regulars in there know not to touch my dog. So I literally like order my thing. I go in, I get it, I go out. It's one of the more reliable coffee shops. They always have what I want. Like it's very easy, right? So let's say that's a level 1 spell. Now, a level 7 spell would be somebody screaming at me about something I do not understand, which happens unfortunately at workplaces, right? You've been in that kind of situation. Now, it doesn't happen very often, but when it does happen, that's going to take a big spell slot, and you've only got one of those. So you can deal with somebody yelling at you once a day, but you can go get coffee like 6 times. So that's another way you could look at it. And just a really simple way that I used to explain to my grandfather and stuff like that is it's a battery, right? Like my battery does not hold a charge like other people's do, because everybody's familiar with that. Like you've got this one, you've got a phone that like the battery lasts all day, and then you get a different phone and the battery lasts for 20 minutes. And like, what the heck is different about it? I'm the 20-minute phone.
That actually makes perfect sense, and I mean, it's explained in a way that me, because I'm not the most educated, I'm smart enough, but it makes sense to me,
Right.
And I really like that.
I like being able to break concepts down in a way where you don't have to be educated, and even like very educated people have trouble with this concept. And I'm a big fan of breaking stuff down into visuals or tangibles, right? Like you can hold 8 spoons. You can feel the weight of those. You can feel those leaving. You can imagine them. You can, there's different ways that you can interact with that idea. So your original question was, how do I tell when I'm having a meltdown? Actually, you asked, can I tell if I'm getting to a nonverbal state, which for me usually means I'm right on the edge of a meltdown. And I backed up to explain spoon theory because my answer is when I start losing spoons is at a rapid pace. If I realize that like I have just lost 3 spoons in about 30 seconds, that's usually a sign for me to stop and look around and be like, okay, what is causing me to lose all these spoons? But sometimes it sneaks up on me. My mouth sounds get mushy. And my husband will ask me to repeat something more than once. And I'll say, do I sound weird? And he'll say, you sound a little wobbly, because he's not going to tell me I sound weird because he's a sweetheart. And I'll realize that my words are not coming out correctly. And it happens like when people are angry and I get defensive. Sometimes it becomes difficult to talk. When I was a kid and I got in trouble, I'd go silent. I wasn't diagnosed as autistic until I was in my 20s. So as a kid, it looked like I was being defiant. But I really I couldn't talk. I couldn't get the words out. It's really interesting. I know a lot of autistics that find it difficult to walk and talk, which sounds ridiculous, but our wires get crossed. Our brains are built a little differently. So the bits that make that make the mouth sounds sometimes have to borrow from the bits that make your feet move the right way. So a lot of us are clumsy, and uncoordinated and things like that. And it all kind of connects back together.
That's awesome, the spoon theory, because I always say to people that it's difficult to understand people's disabilities through reading about it or hearsay. It's better to communicate with someone directly, have more empathy in that way, and you can better relate to it, like talking to you right now. Help me and Richard and people in our community to understand when we do encounter people and to treat them in the same way that we do blind folks. But it's really, really interesting about saying about in your 20s. I've read before that many people who are neuro non-typical, specifically women, don't get diagnosed until much later in life. Is that pretty common?
Yeah, unfortunately, it's not a secret that the medical model, especially in the US, is for a healthy white male.
Funny that.
Just to be clear, and so if you're anything other than that, the diagnostic criteria is different, right? So a really easy way to explain this is women in the US and in other countries, but I'm from the US, so I'm going to speak for that, are socialized to be quiet. We are socialized to stay in the background, and we are taught how to be performative with our emotions as well when we're being raised. So it's easier for us to sneak under the diagnostic radar because boys are not taught to be quiet, and so their weird, if you will, is a little bit more in your face. They're not taught how to use emotions, and so like explicitly. So their emotional regulation is something they do have to learn. If they're not socialized to it, then it becomes a problem at a very young age. So that's just one example. There's a ton of them really, but like the Black community doesn't get diagnosed like you think women don't get diagnosed, you throw in the Black community or any other, race that's not white, and it's like that level again of not being diagnosed. It's really tough. And it's
a shame, honestly.
it is, and it's kind of a privilege too. It's definitely a shame, and it's a weird privilege to be able to get a diagnosis, like, and I did not realize that until years later, where I knew people that were definitely autistic, but they couldn't afford a diagnosis,
Right.
or they had tried to get a diagnosis and they'd been diagnosed as something else, right? Like, they tried to slap bipolar disorder on me a couple of times, which is a very common misdiagnosis for women on the spectrum. So, yeah, it's fun.
I know. I'll speak very generally here. I know a child who would benefit from talking to someone and maybe seeing if they have any of those triggers of being neuro non-typical, but the background they come from culturally don't acknowledge any kind of mental health issue, and so they refuse to engage with it. And to me, the problem is that they're then going to be diagnosed in their 20s, and then it takes years to understand how to cope with life, and you've already been conditioned in a certain way, like yourself, Shawna, where you struggle.
I mean, that's difficult too. Other cultures that don't, that treat mental illness differently are. That's a whole. We could talk about that forever. In the U.S., what can be difficult is the treatments, right? So I found out after I was diagnosed. I'm separated from my biological family, but I found out after I was diagnosed. I went back to them and I was like, "Did you know this?" And I found out that they had been told when I was very young, like kindergarten, first grade, second grade, that repeatedly by multiple teachers that there was something wrong with me, basically, and I should be, it might be autism, and they should look into it. And they didn't do it because in the 80s, you a lot of times you'd get stuck in an asylum, or you'd get put in the special ed classes, and which are not a warm, supportive environment, so you can be the best that you can be. There are places where people get left behind, really, and they get if you can't meet this criteria, then you will never go to college. I got told that often when I was in school. So my biological parents chose to not get me diagnosed and to shove me into mainstream school and hope I survived. And I did, very lucky, but a lot of people don't. Like, the trauma that comes with an undiagnosed childhood it can be tough. It's a different kind of trauma to being diagnosed and going through a horrible medical system, but it's just, so people make choices like that a lot. I know somebody whose kid was diagnosed young and went through a certain kind of training that I loathe because it's torture, and now this person believes their kid is cured. Which,
God.
and
Awful.
And I'm like, autism, it's the way your brain is shaped. Like, that's not cured. You've tortured and trained like a dog your kid into behaving a way that you think is appropriate. But as soon as he, grows up to a different age and new behaviors become the new appropriate, you're going to have to train him again.
That just sounds like those camps where the Christians try and get the gayness out of you by doing all this horrible conditioning.
Interestingly enough, the guy that invented gay conversion therapy also invented ABA therapy.
What a gem. We should get that guy a medal,
He's the worst. I've read about him, and I've read some of his like his writings, and like, that guy was messed up. Like, it was one of the things he said, I forget his name, but one of the things he said was an autistic is not a person. They're human, right? Like, they've got legs and arms and eyes and mouths and stuff, but they're empty psychologically. So what you have to do is build a person inside of this empty shell.
And I'm not saying a dog is not a canine.
Like, what the fuck? Like, a lot of people back then thought we didn't have souls and like we were evil and all of this stuff. Like, empty is the word autism comes from some Greek thing that means focused on self or something like that, because a lot of autistics, finding the world a very unfriendly place, will turn inward. And that's not uncommon, right? Like, there are a lot of people that tend to turn inward, but it's pronounced enough in autism that it became part of what it's called. And I hate it because we're looking at the medical model of disability here, right? Which says these kids are broken. It says I'm broken because I can't interact with the world the way everybody else does. But I like to look at disability from a social model, right? Which means I am not broken, but the world is. The world was not built for me. And so I proudly claim the label, if you will, the title of a disabled human, because I want to call out the way the world is not built for people like me and other disabled people. But I find a lot of people don't like to be called disabled because they feel like if disabled is another word for broken. And I agree. In the medical model, disabled is absolutely another word for broken. In the social model, it's a way to label yourself as somebody that the world was not built for. So it's yes, I have opinions. I don't know if you've noticed in this, 30 minutes.
No, I hadn't noticed at all. But I agree with them. I mean, I do agree with them, and you're right. The world is broken.
Yeah.
And not one person can fix it, but it takes us getting together to show them that hey, we're just like you. You're broken, although you don't realize it.
Right.
It takes us all. And me, I've never been diagnosed with any form of autism. Me personally, I just don't like people because they get on my nerves. The less people I have to deal with, the better. I mean, a select few that I will talk to and
I hear
hang
you,
around.
Richard. I get what you're saying.
I get that. I mean, I find a lot of people, a lot of disabled people feel that way because we are, like nobody walks up to me and is like, "Hey, I love your hoodie. Where'd you get that?" Right? Like people walk up to me and they're like, "Damn, your chair looks cool. Oh, your puppy's adorable." I was at a conference once for professional work reasons. And I had a buddy because I'm autistic and couldn't take my husband. And this coworker agreed to be my buddy. And after the 6th instance of somebody coming up to me and being like, "You have a dog." And me being like, "Yes, it's a service dog." "Why do you have a service dog?" "Oh, I'm autistic." I wasn't using my chair at the time. And then so it looked like I was either blind, or if they could tell I wasn't blind, they wanted to know what the dog was for. They'd find out what the dog was for. They would not ask me my name. They'd ask for the dog's name. They would not tell me their name or anything work related, and then walk away. And after like the 5th or 6th time of this, my buddy was like, "Does this happen to you often?" And I was like, "Oh yeah." And they were like, "We're here for a work conference. Like no one has asked you a single question about work stuff." And I went, "Nope." And she was like, "What if you like presented on a work topic?" And I was like, "It would be all about the accessibility of it." And she was like, the disabled of it. And she was like, "This is stupid." And I was like, "Yes."
Yeah,
like,
what's your service dog for? None of your business.
I had a woman, I was working in a retail environment, so she walks up to me. A lot of people in a retail environment think my service dog is a stuffed animal because she's got curly hair, which I find really strange. Like, why would I be standing here with a stuffed animal on the floor? But okay.
Well, I would have fun with that one.
Oh, I couldn't at work, but whenever I was riding the bus, I had the best time. But this woman walked up to me and she's like, "Oh, of course, cute dog. Oh, you must be blind." And I've gotten that a lot when I was walking. I don't get it anymore because I have the chair, but which is hilarious, by the way, because like so if I'm in a chair, I'm not blind. Like, but if I was walking with the dog, "Oh, you must be blind." I said, "No, ma'am." And I'd gotten that a lot at that point, so I knew how to deal with it. I said, "No, ma'am, how may I help you?" And she was like, "You're not blind?" I said, "No, ma'am. But how can I help you?" Like, let's move on from this kind of thing. Like,
Yeah.
She was like, "Oh, you must be autistic." Now, I had not gotten that before, right? Like, I'd gotten people assuming I was blind and then me saying, "No, I'm not." And then them being like, "Oh, well, then what's wrong with you?" But I'd never had somebody jump straight to autism. And I found that really interesting. Not a lot of people know about autism service dogs. And it took me completely by surprise. So I fell back on my usual, "How can I help you?" to try and get out of it. She tipped her head sideways and started to drawl out the words, "Can you help me?" And I was like, in my head, I was like, "I'm not going to fucking help you now, like you're the worst." And so out loud, I said, "I will make sure someone else comes and helps you if you tell me what you need." So I finished that interaction, but like that kind of thing happened a lot, like people on a bus would be like, "Is that a dog?" My favorite way to respond to that would be, "Oh, thank God you can see her too."
Oh, yes.
Cleared out the bus, got lots of room that way. Another response I've had was, "Is that a dog?" No, it's a dragon. And then I'd move on. If I was on the street and somebody asked me if it was a dog, this was when so my dogs are off leash trained, so they don't need leashes. But when I'm in a big city like Chicago or Boston, I leave them on a leash so that people leave me alone. And it's like a quick release so they can do their job because they can't do their job on a leash. Anyway, so dog on leash for the record. If people were like, "Is that a dog?" I would look behind me and act frightened and be like, "Oh no," and start running, and she'd run after me, and I'd be like, "Ah."
Oh, this can be a beautiful friendship.
Mm-hmm.
I find that people make so many parallels, and they're trying to relate to you, and they're trying to be empathetic.
Yeah.
Like I used to get when my vision was a little better, and people would say, "Oh, why are you doing that?" I'd be like, "Oh, I can't see it. I'm legally blind." And they'd say, "Oh yeah, I wear glasses too." And I get they're not trying to
Yeah.
reduce my problem; they're trying to relate to me, but it's hard not to get a bit like, "Fuck you, man."
Oh, so I was new to using the wheelchair. My condition is degenerative, and whenever I get so I have when it's out of remission, which it is, things will trigger like a flare. So like I'll get lots of inflammation, lots of pain, and if the flare lasts long enough, my condition degenerates. So that kind of pain becomes my new normal. So this was a new flare for me. I was just starting to accept using a wheelchair because when my doctor recommended it, I was like, but I can still walk, right? Again, I was socialized to believe that if you're in a wheelchair, you cannot walk. And she was like, no, this is to preserve what walking you can do, because otherwise, if you keep walking around like this, you're going to need a wheelchair and you won't be able to walk. And I was like, I don't know. And we argued about it for like a month. So I'm at a convention and bathrooms are not wheelchair accessible. I don't care if it's a bigger stall. It just doesn't work. And I am still ambulatory and I do need to walk a little bit. So a long convention, I can't stand for long periods of time, can't walk for long periods of time. So chair, but I would use my bathroom breaks as a time to like get up, stretch, move, that kind of thing. So I get out of my chair and I'm starting to walk towards the bathroom. And this woman goes, oh, "Shame on you."
Yep. You can walk.
And I looked around and then was like, "Oh, nope, you're talking to me." And she was like, "How pathetic do you have to be to fake a disability? Shame on you." And I'm standing there desperately having to pee. Okay. And I had two choices. I could either explain to this woman who had been socialized the same way I had, that if you can walk, you're faking. I could explain to her what I had learned in the last 6 months, or I could go pee. Right, like those were my two options, and it was difficult because like she could follow me into the bathroom. I need to use the accessible stall for the handles when I'm not in the chair. She could make a big deal out of that. Like which version of this gets me out of this social interaction with as many spoons as possible, because again, I'm also autistic. So like, even if you're not autistic, explaining, "Yes, ma'am, there are ambulatory wheelchair users, don't be a dick," takes energy.
Flip them the finger, and then go on about your business.
I was standing there staring at her like frozen, because it was one of very few times that I get left alone at conventions, because terrible things like this always happen. Another time my service dog went into an elevator before I did, and the doors closed too quickly, and another time I went in first and she didn't get in fast enough and the doors closed, and she was like, "No one should leave me alone," basically. So I was frozen, and one of the convention like humans saw, because she was screaming at me, this happening, and knows me and has watched me, because I go to these conventions a lot, has watched me degenerate, has watched me like be able to walk through the lines, has watched me be like, "I really need a chair," all the way up to using a wheelchair, like gives me thumbs up, like, "You're finally using a wheelchair, good job." So they see this happening and they just like wave at me like I got it, from really far away. And so I was like, all right. So I went to the bathroom as this like, convention person jogged up and was like, "Okay, let's have a conversation about how you can't yell at other humans," for me, which was really nice. But
That's good.
people are dumb.
So
and that's why I don't like them.
Mm-hmm.
That's true. Me included in Richard's hatred list. But your service dog, Shawna, does it provide comfort to you? How did your service dog benefit you?
Yeah. So one of the things that gets me is change. So I was working in a retail environment and I was riding a bus to work. But you don't have control over those things, right? Like the bus never comes at the same time. You don't get to sit in the same seat, you know. So one of the ideas was that she would provide a source of constancy for me, which actually does work really well when she's not around. I'm very, very much more engaged in the things that are changing. She also interrupts stims. So self-stimulation is like you'll see people like moving their fingers or flapping. That's a stereotypical one, flapping or rocking. There are also bad stims. They tend to be self-harming. So some of my bad stims are I scratch up the insides of my arms to the point where I have scars that look like I tried to commit suicide, you know, because I've scratched so badly that they've scarred. I'll also hit my head against a wall, which I haven't done in a really long time. But I did when I was a kid. I'd get so overwhelmed by the lunchroom. I'd throw all of my lunch away and then stand next to the wall and just hit my head against the wall for the entire lunch period. Like I was super autistic as a kid. They just didn't.
That's tough, man.
So those kinds of stims are not good, right? Like I am a full supporter of stims if it's a safe place where you can do that. And there should be more safe places, but self-harm stims are bad. Those tend to be meltdown related, and because stims can be joyful, stims can be a way of expressing emotion. So Tara is trained to interrupt the bad stims. So if I start scratching or hitting my legs or anything like that, she has 3 phases. She has one where she gets up from wherever she is and she comes over and she looks at me and puts her head in my lap. She has another one where she will start tapping at my leg with her paw, or like at my arm, she'll pull my hand away from my arm. And the third one is when she's like, you know what, you're not listening to me. God damn it. So this is happening. And she will leap into my lap. And so she burrows her way in between my arms. So I can't do anything, right? Like I can't hurt myself, and I'll start petting her. We were really worried that I would start doing the harm to her, but we're really lucky. And if anybody is going to be training their dog to do this, you want to be really mindful of this. We got really lucky that I don't, even when I'm in my worst of melty places, she can interrupt like that, and she doesn't get hurt, which is good. And then another thing she does is she provides oh crap, what do they call it? Deep pressure something. So a common stereotype with autistics is, one, we don't like to be touched, but also we like to be squished. But it can only be the right person, right? Like if a random human watching me have a meltdown comes up and tries to restrain me, very bad things will happen.
I can imagine.
I have taken self-defense classes and I don't like it. Now, if my husband sees me melting down and he starts to squish me, 9 times out of 10, I'm good with that. The 10th time, the dog is always helpful in that. I also have a lot of chronic pain, so she can like lay on my she'll do this without me telling her to. Like my knee will really be bothering me because it's particularly swollen, and she'll lay her head or her shoulder on it. It helps a little bit of pressure. So
that's fantastic, man.
It is.
Well, thanks for joining us today, Shawna. Before we wrap up, would you come back on and maybe we can have a conversation about playing tabletop RPGs with autism and how you found that?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I would love to talk about that. There's an organization called Game to Grow that is wonderful, and they use tabletop games like Dungeons and Dragons and like Magic the Gathering to teach kids like me with different kinds of social challenges, social skills. And it's amazing. I wish I'd had that when I was a kid. I'd love to talk about that more. I think it's really, really amazing. The kinds of friendships you can find. And I really didn't feel like I belonged in a group of humans until I started playing games, because it has rules and stuff that everyone agrees to and are written down, so they're not unspoken bullshit. And yeah,
well, absolutely, man. We'll come back and talk about that. It's been a blast having you on. I've learned a lot today.
Me too.
Well, thanks for listening to me just babble on about stuff.
Oh no, see, it's not babble. I learned something. When Jim talks, that's babble. So, you know, and just like whenever I talk, it's babble to Jim because he can't understand me anyway.
I
So,
don't speak Southern, so I have no idea what you're saying.
Well,
Shauna,
I
I
really
appreciate
have
you having me
enjoyed it.
on. Yeah, I
are
really
there
appreciate you
any,
having me on. And this was very kind of you, and I'm glad to be able to talk about these things because the community really likes, you know, nothing for us without us. So an autistic talking about an autistic experience, while it's just one autistic experience, I think that kind of awareness is really helpful. So thank you for that.
Yeah, no, we want to try and expand our understanding of other people's disabilities and challenges because we got a good knowledge of the blind community, but the more people we can bring in, the better. And I know we have a bunch of diverse people in our community, but helping to understand them is a big step. Is there any projects or anything you want to share, Shawna, that you have coming up or that you're working on?
Oh, let me think. I stream all the time. So I stream 2 different D&D games, one of which is just a kind of a home game, and one of which is actually it's meant to be an example of how you can get into gaming and how you can deal with certain things, like like if somebody has a disability in your game, or so that one's on Saturday. I'm gonna do a birthday one shot where I combine all of my games into all of my players into one game, which should be highly entertaining. That's going to be the last week in April. But no, I don't think so. There's a couple of things they haven't been solidified yet, but I will talk about them obsessively on my Twitter account. So like 7 Spoon, all spelled out if you want to hear
go
more.
and follow Shawna at like 7 Spoon on Twitter. Richard, what have you got going on, buddy?
Well, the first KWF show will be released this Wednesday. Got several players in there. Taking a week off with the Star Wars 5e game. The Rhymer's coming up this Wednesday. And I'm hoping, and it's against my better judgment, to start making Buffy the Vampire Slayer accessible. Is one I had purchased, and yes, I'm in love with Buffy because she's so smart. Has nothing to do with what she looked like whenever I could see, and doing a lot of that. And there was one other thing. Going to be trying something out this upcoming Tuesday with Jesse's campaign, in which going to do it kind of like a Mortal Kombat type of scene. Because one or two of our players is going to be missing, so we're going to fight other creatures and fight each other to determine the champion.
That's awesome, man.
I think it's going to be a lot of fun. It's not Jesse's idea because I'm never going to give him credit for anything. But absolutely fun. I think that's really about it, other than, you know, typical day-to-day stuff. And, you know, we got to yell at Matt because he introduced me to like 3 or 4 different RPGs yesterday when me and him were talking. And of course, guess who went to Drive Through RPG and purchased them?
Yeah, you've got like a huge debt. They're going to come around and break your legs soon to get that money out of you for the RPGs you're buying.
I'm telling you, I can't help it. They say, "Oh, that sounds cool." I may never open it up and read it. It's like, "Oh, I'm going to get it because it's on sale."
Yep. I've got a friend who does that. He's constantly like, "Have you heard of this one?" And I'm like, "No, buddy." And he's like, "It's really cool." And he tells me all about it. And it's wonderful because it saves me going and like doing exactly what you do, where I have a pile of things I'll never look at again. At least I had that one moment where he explains it to me and I'm like, great. And then we're done, you know?
Now you're just like Jim, making fun of me. That's it. Friendship's over. I'm out of here.
Well,
But yeah,
thanks for
that's all
joining
that's going on.
Okay, well, thanks for joining us, Shawna. And I've got a beginners game for D&D coming up in June. So anyone that's looking to get into D&D and nervous about it is for complete beginners. I'm also running a one shot in the next couple of weeks, which is a new game system based around sea shanties, and that's about it for me. So I cannot think.
I'm obsessed with sea shanties, and in fact, a bard in my last Treasure Tuesday game was like, I sing a sea shanty. And I was like, do it then. And he sang my favorite one. And I was like, all of the inspiration. You have all of it.
Well, if you want to join our sea shanty game, Shawna, there's still spaces. I think we've got about 4 people who are very excited. But
I'd love to. Yeah. If you need another person, let me know.
Absolutely. I'll send you some info. But
Only
thanks
if
for
it's got
joining us, Shawna.
zombies.
Oh, and zombies. Oh, yeah, I'm starting a zombie game next week. Yeah.
Let's see
But
there.
yeah, we'll be back with Shawna again soon to talk about tabletop RPGs. Next week, I'm going to be discussing if the OrCam works with tabletop role-playing games and if it's worth using for them. And the week after that, we're going to be joined by Shawna and I's buddy Blind Temple.
Well, that'll be good. Get that man a kitty, damn it.
Absolutely, yeah.
I guess if he's y'all's friend, I won't get along with him, but I'll try, you know.
Oh, Temple's a sweetheart. He knows so many things. He's got so many good stories. It's going to be a good one, I think.
Absolutely. But I think that's it, Richard.
Yeah, and we'll hear you next week.
Yeah, thanks, everybody.